Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where and when you are watching us. Welcome, everybody, to another section of our conference series, Philosophy on Visual Arts. Today's lecture will be given by Dr. Cécile Angelini. In her academic and professional activities, Dr. Angelini has focused on exploring aesthetics and contemporary art. She obtained a PhD degree from the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium in 2018. Her thesis reflects on the artistic judgment and on the contemporary French Renaissance on Kantian aesthetics. Her current research interests center on philosophical problems raised by unprecedented modes of expression in contemporary art. After obtaining her doctoral degree, Dr. Angelini decided to take a break from academia and in order to work in the field of contemporary art, ultimately becoming director of the Oficina de la Escritura in Turin, workshop of writing. She is now looking to pursue another opportunities in research in the field of art. And today, Dr. Cécile Angelini will give us lecture, Contemporary Art and Judgment, Learning to Question How We Evaluate Art. I will do the same thing in Portuguese. Muito boa tarde, boa noite a todos e todas, depender de onde estejam nos vendo e quando estejam nos vendo. Sejam todos e todas muito bem-vindos e muito bem-vindas a mais uma sessão do nosso ciclo de conferências de Filosofia e Artes Visuais. Hoje a conferência será da doutora Cécile Angelini. A doutora Angelini, em suas atividades acadêmicas e profissionais, tem se dedicado a explorar a estética e a arte contemporânea. Ela obteve o título de doutora pela Universidade Católica de Louvain, na Bélgica, em 2018, e a sua tese reflete sobre o juízo artístico e as ressonâncias francesas contemporâneas da estética kantiana. Seus atuais interesses de pesquisa centram-se nos problemas filosóficos levantados pelos modos de expressão sem precedentes da arte contemporânea. Após a obtenção de seu doutorado, ela decidiu dar uma pausa na vida acadêmica para trabalhar no campo da arte contemporânea per se, tornando-se, por fim, diretora da Oficina de la Escritura em Turim, Oficina de Escritura em Turim, na Itália. Atualmente, ela busca outras oportunidades em pesquisa ou na área de arte. Hoje, a doutora Cécile Angelini vai nos brindar com a conferência Contemporary Art and Judgment, Learning to Question How We Evaluate Art, ou seja, arte contemporânea e juízo, aprendendo a questionar como avaliamos arte. Cécile, thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Romulo, for inviting me to speak at this wonderful conference. Today, I'd like to reflect on the question of judgments in relation to art. How do we judge a work of art? Are some judgments better than others? Is judgment purely subjective, or can it lay claim to some objectivity, even universality? These are questions Immanuel Kant already asked in the Critique of the Power of Judgment, back in 1790. He pointed out that when we say something is beautiful, we are not just expressing an opinion, we're also claiming that others should agree with us, that our judgment carries a kind of universal appeal. In his famous Antinomy of Taste, Kant suggested that although every judgment involves subjectivity, it doesn't prevent communication or debate. On the contrary, he believed that every judgment contains at least the possibility of being shared, of creating a common horizon of meaning. That's the kind of idea I'd like to defend today. But before we talk about judgment, we need to correct that very assumption. There is not just one kind of judgment about artworks, but many, varied, often entangled, with different functions and implications. And in fact, contemporary art, by its very nature, has brought this multiplicity of judgments to view. That's what I'd like to explore with you now. When we talk about contemporary art, we often mean it in a purely chronological sense, the art being made today. But this raises a few problems. First, when exactly does today begin? With Picasso, with Duchamp, with conceptual art? Second, when does it end? Will art always remain contemporary? And finally, today's art is incredibly diverse. Visit any gallery or museum, and you'll see figurative and abstract paintings, sculptures, ready-mades, installations, all kinds of wildly different objects. What exactly do an installation by Anne-Veronica Jenssens and a neon straight white canvas by François Morlet have in common? To address this, sociologist Nathalie Heinich proposes a different approach. Instead of treating contemporary art as a period of time, she suggests treating it as a genre, like classical or modern, with its own defining characteristics. For her, what defines the contemporary genre is that it plays with the ontological boundaries of art. It tests the very notion of what counts as an artwork. That's an interesting idea, but in my view, the critical edge was already present in modern art. Philosopher and art historian Thierry Lenain draws a helpful distinction. Modern art, he says, mainly carried out a critique of the artwork's content, its subject, form, or expressive dimension. But contemporary art goes further. It questions something deeper, the very location of the artwork, the evidence of where it is supposed to be. In French, Thierry Lenain talks about the lieu of the artwork, le lieu de l'œuvre, which could be translated by the Latin term locus. We will see that it is not just a simple geographic location, but rather the site and center of the experience of the artwork. From now on, I'll use the word locus. Before, there was an almost unquestioned assumption. The locus of the artwork is the object on display. In other words, the artwork was the physical object shown in a gallery or museum. And so the experience of the artwork came from contemplating that object. To comprehend a Jackson Pollock or an Anthony Caro, it seemed obvious to look at the painting or the sculpture. But that's no longer the case. Today, we can no longer assume that what's placed in front of us is the artwork, or that it's the whole of the artwork. It might be a clue, a fragment, a medium, or an access point. Let me illustrate this shift by comparing two works. To experience New York Office by Edward Hopper, it once seems obvious. You simply looked at the painting. It was framed, lit, displayed as an artwork. That was the locus of the work, the canvas itself. And even today, if we go to the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts in Alabama, we expect to see that very painting by Hopper, not a reproduction, not a list of its colors or dimensions, just the painting. No one questions whether it's the artwork or not. Its location is unambiguous. Now consider something very different. In 1969, at the exhibition When Attitudes Become Form in Bern, Walter de Maria presented a piece called Art by Telephone. What was it? A simple telephone placed on the floor with a long cord and a piece of paper next to it. The paper read, in English and German, "If this telephone rings, you might answer it. Walter de Maria is on the line and would like to talk to you." So where is the artwork in this case? Is it in the phone itself, in the instruction, in the call that might happen, in the conversation between artist and viewer? The answer is more subtle. The artwork exists between elements, between visible and invisible, between object and idea, between artist and visitor. The phone is not the artwork, it's a device, a trigger for anticipation. What matters is the concept and the situation it creates, a fictional conversation, an intriguing tension, a waiting game. The viewer starts wondering, will the phone ring? Will the artist speak to me? What is the message? So here, the artwork isn't something to look at. It's something to experience in time, even to imagine. What does this tell us? Contemporary art disrupts the old equation, artwork is the object on display. The viewer's role changes too. Before, we were encouraged to contemplate, to fix our gaze on the object. Now, the object asks questions. Is it really here that one should be looking? Is this really the work? Our instinct to look is interrupted. Our experience becomes mediated and delayed. Walter de Maria's piece embodies this perfectly. It puts the viewer in a state of waiting for a voice, for the artwork to speak, for meaning to arrive. It creates the feeling that the real work is hidden or yet to come. And so the viewer's role becomes something else entirely, not contemplation, but investigation. There's nothing immediately aesthetic to grasp, no form demanding admiration. Instead, from a phone, a note, a protocol, from secondary objects, the viewer sets off in search of the work. They become a kind of detective, looking for clues, piecing things together. So, what has contemporary art revealed? That there isn't just one kind of judgment at play, but at least three. A typological judgment, when we say, this is where the artwork is. An ontological judgment, when we claim, this is the artwork and that is just mediation. An evaluative judgment, when we say, this piece is interesting or not. And these three judgments don't just coexist, they often unfold in a sequence. In fact, we could think of them as forming a kind of arrow, moving from topological to ontological to evaluative. First, the viewer wonders, where is the work? Then, what is it? And only after that, is it good? In other words, before we can judge a work's quality, we first have to locate it and identify it. Only once the investigation feels revolved, or at least clarified, can we really form a critical opinion. Of course, it's always possible to enjoy or judge an artwork right away without going through all that. But in such cases, are we really judging that work? Or are we reacting to something else entirely? I leave that question open for discussion later. Now, the three kinds of judgments, topological, ontological, and evaluative, mainly concern the ordinary viewer. But contemporary art has also foregrounded another kind of judgment, what philosopher Drª Cécile called institutional judgments. These are made by art world professionals, artists, critics, curators, collectors. Let me now give a few examples. Let's start with the critic's judgment, revealed by artist John Baldessari. In several of his works, Baldessari painted nothing but text, short excerpts from art theory manuals or critics' writings. Placed in a conceptual art context, these texts take a humorous, ironic tone. He's playing with them. Take, for example, composing on a canvas. In this piece, Baldessari reproduces a paragraph from an art instruction book. It lists questions every artist should ask themselves before starting a painting. How is the composition balanced? What's the format? What tones are being used? Above the text, we see the title, Composing on a Canvas. Now, these questions are clearly intended for painters. They're meant to help artists compose, but they could just as well serve as a checklist for critics or amateur viewers, a kind of ready-made evaluation tool. And yet, there's a problem. These questions don't really apply to Baldessari's painting itself. Yes, it has a canvas, and yes, it's painted. But it contains no focal image, no structure tones, no real pull toward the center of the frame. It's just text, painted in black and white, executed by someone else, not even the artist himself. So here's the contradiction. We're clearly looking at a painting. one that has been accepted by the art world and hung in a gallery, but it doesn't fit the very rules described in the text it displays, rules every art student has probably heard in school. What does this show us? It highlights the gap between different judgments. The judgment directed at the artist, according to instructional rules from the 1960s, the judgment of the institution, which chose to exhibit this work despite those rules, and the judgment expected from the artist, who has to create while navigating all these contradictory demands, those of art educations, of critics, of society. The title Composing on a Canvas also plays with language. To compose, in English, can mean to create an image, but also to write, those actions usually reserved respectively for artists, for the first, and critics, for the second, but which Baldessari's painting managed to bring together in a single work. Let's turn now to the collector's judgment displayed by François Morlae's Bouche-Trou. At first glance, it looks like a disassembled aluminum frame. The square has been broken apart and rearranged into a kind of T shape. One side of the top bar is missing and reattached halfway down the vertical stem. The piece comes with a printed page, almost like a certificate. It includes photos of the deconstructed frame displayed in different settings, plus a few promotional slogans. And here's one of them. If there's one dramatic situation above all others, is the collector who has absolutely no room left to display a new artwork at home. No place for a painting, let alone a sculpture. And yet the desire and the means are very much there. Well, the Bouche-Trou, a superb and very contemporary sculpture, is here to help. It will modestly slide between other paintings and can even serve as a frame, an accessory so often neglected by today's careless artists. So, the tone is light and ironic, but the message is quite sharp. Morlae is reacting to a shift in contemporary art, away from small framed works and toward increasingly large, oversized pieces. Painting and sculpture today often have no frame at all, sometimes because they're too big or because framing them would seem absurd. Installations, of course, take up entire rooms. And all this raises a practical issue. Only people with space, and that often means wealth, can buy and house these works. Unlike small conceptual pieces, which are easy to store and maintain, large format works require serious infrastructure. In fact, even museums hesitate to buy such works. They take up too much room, cost too much to conserve. So the past is often left open to private collectors. And what does Morlae do? He imagines a dramatic scenario, a collector who also runs out of room. To help, ironically of course, he creates the Bouche-Trou, a kind of gap filler, a modest-sized work that fits nearly between other pieces. Morlae is highlighting several interest-based judgments. The collector, who might choose Bouche-Trou because it fits the wall, not because of any artistic merit. But there's also the artist's judgment, selecting a format that responds to a buyer's needs. And finally, the gallerist's judgment, happy to exhibit a work that's easy to sell. Now let's talk about the space in which art is displayed. Many contemporary artists have turned their attention to this space, understood not just as a geographical space, but as a constructed environment that shapes how we see and judge art. What role do museums and galleries really play? Do they influence how we experience a piece? Do they condition our judgments? In his measurement series, that he started in 1967, Mel Buckner explored this directly. He used black tape to draw lines directly on the gallery walls and added precise measurements using letraset. Apart from the measurement lines drawn on the walls, the gallery was empty, which placed the exhibition space at the forefront of the work. Without the space, the measurements no longer mean anything, as they possess no metaphorical meaning. Their sole function is to signal the presence of the space as a constructed and already conceived space. but now as turning our attention to something usually ignored, the supposed neutral white cube that silently frames the art experience. Daniel Buren did something similar. In Up and Down, In and Out, Step by Step, a sculpture, he placed his signature vertical stripes on the risers of the stairs at the Chicago Art Institute. The viewer's movements, entering, climbing, descending, leaving, became part of the artwork itself. So what does this tell us? It tells us that our judgment on artworks is never isolated. It's a result of a complex process, one that involves different actors, spaces, and expectations. And the real question is, to what extent should our judgment take these things into account? Now, let's have a look at judgments from the galleries, the museum, and the exhibition curators. Contemporary artists haven't just questioned certain roles in the art world. They've embodied them. Over time, many artists began to take on the task of presenting their own work, stepping into roles traditionally held by art galleries, museum curators, and exhibition curators. Presenting their work outside institutional settings was one of the first ways artists bypassed intermediaries and spoke directly to the public. Daniel Buren, for example, had his signature colored stripes carried by sandwich board men through the streets, making the work visible to all passerby. The casual viewer could immediately encounter the work without the mediation of an institution, a text, or an interpretive framework. It was a direct face-to-face with the public. The artist and the audience were left alone with the work and with their own interpretation. In other gesture, Buren reversed the strategy. Instead of stepping out of the institution, he blocked access to it. He used his stripe motif to seal the entrance of the gallery where he was exhibiting, preventing viewers from entering. The gesture questioned the territorial nature of the institution and made it visible in the same move. Symbolically, it opposed the artwork, signaled by the stripes, to its intermediaries, embodied by the gallery, affirming the artist's authority and casting the institution as obsolete. In both cases, exiting or sealing the place, Buren asserted that other ways of exhibiting art are possible. Exhibiting a work doesn't have to mean hanging it on a traditional wall. It can mean affirming its existence to the public via sandwich board carriers, documents, a telephone call, or any existing or new methods. Jan de Betz offered another original example, a televised gallery. For his work, TV as a Fireplace, which he made in 1969, he asked the German public broadcaster to air a 3-minute video of a crackling fireplace every night from December 25 to 31. To see de Betz's piece, you didn't go to a gallery or a museum. You simply turned on your television and tuned in. The exhibition space was your living room. Once the artwork no longer resides in a physical object, but in an idea or a process, new modes of display become viable. The aim is to communicate an idea to an audience by any means necessary. To do that, the artist must take on new roles. A bit of a gallerist to promote the work, a bit of a museum curator to document the process, and a bit of an exhibition curator to choose how the work is presented. The artist shifts from craftsperson to communicator, from form maker to director. This transformation is especially clear in the work of Robert Barry. The American conceptual artist chose to exhibit invisible content, inert gases, radio waves, radioactive emissions, all scientifically measurable and physically real, but impossible to see or represent plastically. Take radiation piece cesium-137. Barry presented beta radiation in a gallery, unseen by the naked eye. What the viewer encounters was a small plaque on the wall listing the artist's name, the title of the work, the components used, the half-life of the cesium-137 sample, and the date of the piece. The plaque attests to the presence of the work, but it is not the work itself. And crucially, it was Barry, not a museum curator or exhibition curator, who decided how and where to display that information. This kind of conceptual staging has at least two consequences. First, it draws attention to the exhibition space itself. The visitor, seeing nothing, begins to scan the space, asking, where is the art? Second, it highlights the importance of presentation. All the choices and gestures that come before an artwork is perceived as such. When a viewer encounters a work, they are actually arriving at the end of a long chain of decisions, judgments about what the work should be. These curatorial gestures used to be hidden, now they are central to the experience. At first glance, these strategies to remove intermediaries' privileges, so prominent in the 1970s, may seem to increase the artist's control. You might think the artist, now taking charge of their communication, becomes solely responsible for their work. But the opposite happened. From the 1980s onwards, intermediaries grew even more influential, and artworks began to appear less isolated masterpieces and more as collective constructions, shaped by multiple voices and roles. Rather than disappearing, intermediaries adapted, becoming artists in their own right. We could say they underwent an artification. One figure embodies this shift, the exhibition curator, who rose in prominence alongside the transformation of the exhibition itself. Yves Michaud reminds us of what the term exhibition means. An exhibition, he says, whether a show, exhibition in English, Ausstellung in German, or Mostra in Italian, is about making things visible. You show, display, present, stage, produce, expose, demonstrate. You bring something into public view. You exhibit what you judge worth showing. The fact that every exhibition contains an element of subjectivity is nothing new. The notion itself implies cutting something out of its original context and representing it as a new narrative. Exhibiting is always a form of staging. You decide where a work will go, how it will be lit, what its label will say. Each of these choices has a practical and theoretical impact on the artwork's identity. The narrative of a work or artist may be more or less faithful to history, more or less bold, commercial, speculative, or poetic. For example, Marcel Duchamp can be presented, following Anne Coquelin and most art historians, as the father of conceptual art. Or, as Cécile Drª did in her 2014 Paris retrospective, primarily as a painter. Every exhibition is a compromise between what is available and what can be done here and now. So no exhibition is objective or complete. It selects, filters, narrates, and embellishes. It always has. What's changed today is not the presence of subjectivity, but the affirmation of it. The goal now seems less to present works neutrally and more to offer a point of view, a new story, a fresh lens. The exhibition curator even signs their work, as though the true artwork were the exhibition itself. It becomes a kind of monumental installation where the individual pieces must be read within the whole. One particularly telling case was Merci Raymond, presented at the Monet de Paris from May 27 to July 17, 2016. Curated by the artist Bertrand Lavier, it was a tribute to Raymond Hans. Lavier took on the full role of exhibition curator. He designed the visitor experience, selected the work, organized the rooms, and even wrote the wall labels. He had carte blanche, curating, interpreting, and designing the show as an artistic act in itself. One room in particular stood out. Titled Foire au Ski, Ski Fair, it centered on Heinz' Palissade de Ski, 1997, and grouped works by artists whose name ended in ski. Christian Boltanski, Vasily Kandinsky, even Igor Stravinsky provided the room's soundtrack. There was no historical or thematic logic, just a playful, phonetic one. It was a bold affirmation of curatorial freedom, a declaration that subjective and creative framing is not only accepted today, but often encouraged. Major works by Boltanski and Kandinsky became elements of a new composition, Swarovski, authored by Lavier. What does this say? That the growing influence of exhibition curators has a desacralizing effect. Artworks no longer appear as self-contained relics with fixed meanings handed down to the viewers. They become starting points, open to interpretation and reinvention. The artwork is no longer a frozen monument. It's a launchpad for dynamic, plural experimentation. And perhaps the blending of artistic and curatorial roles has had a liberating effect. For the work, released from myths of uniqueness and permanence, for the artist, who can now share the burden of meaning-making, and for the viewer, who feels freer to form their own judgments, as if the artwork were now asking for their participation. Now let's talk about legal judgments. Sometimes the question of whether something really counts as a work of art doesn't just stay in the art world. It ends up in court. And the most famous case here is Brancusi's bird. In October 1926, Constantin Brancusi shipped about 20 sculptures to New York for an exhibition. But once they arrived at customs, the works were seized and taxed as ordinary goods. Why? Because customs officers didn't recognize them as art. So a year later, Brancusi filed a lawsuit in the US to prove that one of his sculptures, Bird in Space, really was a work of art and should be tax exempt as such. During the trial, lawyers on both sides suddenly became art critics. They debated the beauty of the piece, whether it resembled anything from art history, and even whether it could trigger an emotional reaction. Now, let's jump back to contemporary art. One of the most heated legal issues today is plagiarism, and more broadly, copyrights. And these often raise difficult questions about what an artwork is and who it belongs to. From a legal point of view, a work has to be original in two senses. First, it has to come from a clearly identifiable author. It has to be authenticated. Second, it needs to be innovative. It has to express something personal or new. And that's where things get tricky, because trying to determine originality isn't just about facts. It also involves value judgments. For example, if we're simply confirming authorship, let's say by checking a signed certificate, then we're staying neutral. But if we're trying to judge how innovative or personal the work really is, then we enter the realm of taste and subjectivity. The stakes are high, because whatever the judge decides doesn't just have legal or financial consequences. It also affects how the public sees the value and identity of the artwork itself. Take the case of Richard Pritz. He's known for reusing images, sometimes pulled from advertising, sometimes from social media, sometimes from other artists. For his new portraits, shown at Gagosian Gallery in New York in 2014, he exhibited large screenshots of Instagram posts, most of them portraits, and added fake commentaries, just like the ones we see every day on social media. One of the original photos, though, had been taken by photographer Donald Graham. And Graham sued Prince for copyright infringement. Why? Because Prince used his photo without asking permission. A similar thing happened to Belgian painter Luc Tuymans. He was found guilty of plagiarism for a painting called A Belgian Politician, based on a photograph of Jean-Marie de Decker that had been published in the newspaper De Standaard. Tuymans never asked the photographer for permission. Now, in this painting, Tuymans has changed the format, used distinctive purple tones, and intended to create a general portrait of a populist politician, not just a literal depiction of de Decker. But the judge didn't agree. He said Tuymans had copied all the key features of the photo: the framing, the cropped head, the lighting, the sweat on the forehead. Everything. In the judge's view, Tuymans' creative intent didn't matter. This was plagiarism. He was ordered not to display or reproduce the work or face a very huge fine. These two cases show just how blurry the line is when it comes to plagiarism. At what point is a work original enough to avoid that accusation? Now, if we believe that simply changing the context creates a new object, then maybe just signing someone else's work could make it art, like Duchamp did with the ready-made. But here's the difference. Duchamp used mass-produced objects, and it's hard to imagine a manufacturer suing over artistic theft. Still, it brings us back to a key question. What makes an artwork what it is? Is it just its physical features? Or is it the gesture, the context, the meaning, the act of saying, this is art? If we go with the second option, then maybe neither Prince nor Tuymans really plagiarized anything. They didn't steal the whole work, just a material piece of it. Not even the whole piece, in fact, just a sample. And they modified it too, changing the scale, altering the colors. Note that both artists were careful. They anticipated possible lawsuits and made sure to tweak the original material. But not everyone follows that path. Take Hélène Sartevant, for example. She went much further. She created near-perfect manual copies of famous artworks, same formats, same appearance, and she called them repetitions. For her, the act of copying itself was the artwork. Now, as spectators, we're pulled into what feels like a legal investigation. Who's the author? What's really new here? How far is it from the original? Is this gesture authentic? Our judgment depends on what we expect from artists and artworks. How much physical effort does an artist need to do to be taken seriously? And how much borrowing is too much? Let's look now at a different kind of judgment, a moral one. Because sometimes what we expect from an artist isn't just originality or technical skill. We also expect a certain kind of attitude. Take the case of Robert Rauschenberg. In 1953, he created a work that didn't just appropriate another artist's piece, it literally erased it. And he wasn't even pursued by anyone. The work is called Erase the Koning Drawing. What you see is a nearly blank sheet of paper in a simple gold frame. But here's what's behind it. Rauschenberg had asked Willem de Kooning, a major American artist, someone he deeply admired, for a drawing that he could erase. At first, de Kooning hesitated, but eventually he agreed, and deliberately chose one of his least favorite drawings, one that was especially complex, filled with pencil, ink, and charcoal. It took Rauschenberg 2 months to erase as much as he could, using every type of eraser he had. When he finished, he asked his friend Jasper Johns to write a label, Erase the Koning Drawing, Robert Rauschenberg, 1953. That label was attached to the work, and without it, the viewer would probably have no idea what they were looking at. So this one object involves at least 3 artists. De Kooning, who made the original drawing, Rauschenberg, who erased it, and Johns, who added the title. But who, in the end, is the true author? None of them fits the traditional image of the romantic artist. De Kooning's hand is erased. Rauschenberg doesn't produce, he destroys. And Johns just writes the title like a museum curator might. Through this strange collaboration, Rauschenberg raises a provocative question. Who is the authentic artist in both senses of the word? On one hand, who is the actual author of the piece? On the other, who deserves the title of artist? Who earns it? Who counts as a real artist? Because being an artist, for many people, comes with moral expectations. We expect the artist to be serious, sincere, passionate, working not for money or fame, but for the love of arts. So when we judge a piece, we don't just look at the materials or the ideas, we often try to read the artist's soul. We want to know what kind of person made this. And that's where contemporary artists often take us by surprise, because many of them deliberately disrupt these moral expectations. They make it hard to tell what's serious and what's a joke. They blur the line between honesty and irony. Take the French artist Ben, for instance. In 1970, he painted a work that simply says, L'art, c'est de faire le pitre. Art is cloning around. So, is he joking? Or is he making a serious point about the absurdity of the art world? As sociologist Nathalie Einisch points out, The piece may look unserious, but the message it carries isn't. And that brings us to a deeper question. What do we mean when we say we want art to be serious? Sometimes it means we want the artist to be truthful, not just messing with us. Someone who generally has something to say and says it clearly. Other times, it's more about technique, that the work should look well-made, polished, confident. Now, at first glance, one of these expectations seems moral and the other artistic, but they're often intertwined. Wanting a technically perfect piece often reflects an admiration for efforts, for the artist's physical dedication, for the idea of the honest hand. It's a moral story disguised as a technical one. An authentic artist should also be sincere. But here's the twist. Some contemporary artists have even claimed the opposite, embracing insincerity as a creative stance. Take Marcel Brotard, for example. At his first exhibition in 1964, he said he wanted to invent something insincere. That's quite a statement. And then there's Andy Warhol, famous for creating a kind of myth around himself, deliberately making his intentions unclear. Were his works a celebration of capitalism, a critique? Was his approach neutral, cynical, or engaged? Now, the economic side of art is crucial too. The art market, auctions, dealers, these are all silent judges, shaping not only the price of artwork, but also how we see them. If an artist is highly valued on the market, that tends to create a positive bias in how their work is appreciated, and vice versa. I won't have time to dive into this, but here's a clever example by Martin Kippenberger. In 1987, for his piece Model Interconti, Kippenberger bought a painting by Gerhard Richter and turned it into a coffee table, which he then sold for less than Richter original. This move questions what really defines an artwork price. Is it the artist's name? Kippenberger was less famous than Richter. The materials? He used Richter's painting, but added table legs. The object's apparent function? It looks more like a furniture than art. Kippenberger playfully shows how economic value in art no longer fully depends on the physical object itself. To conclude this talk, I want to stress that this typology I've presented today is incomplete, of course, partly because of time limits and partly because art practices and discourses keep evolving. Despite these limited examples, I hope I've highlighted something important. The multiplication and diversification of judgment in contemporary art, the appearance of new judges, co-creators of the work, and the emergence of a relational artwork which can only be understood and appreciated through the network of human relationships that builds it. So then, how to judge? With so many types of judgment, can a spectator still decide on the value of a work? It's complicated. Standards of excellence have varied dramatically over time. Experts rarely agree. Following the majority or relying on an algorithm or waiting to see what history decides all feels a bit careless. Should we then just give up and say no judgment is possible? Not necessarily. One solution might be to stop asking about the value of artworks and instead focus on the value of the judgments themselves. That means we can declare a work a total success or failure once and for all. But we can succeed or fail, more or less, at the judgments that the work inspires. I won't detail this method here, but I think you can already see its outline in what I've said. To close, I want to share a key idea. In a 1988 interview with Claire Parnet, Gilles Deleuze said being left-wing, and I quote, is first of all a matter of perception. Not being left-wing is a bit like a mailing address, starting from yourself, the street you're on, the city, the country, other countries, further and further away. Being left-wing is the opposite. It's perceiving first the surroundings, the world, Europe, France, the street of Bizerte, me. It's a phenomenon of perception. You perceive the horizon first. You perceive at the horizon. And that, I think, is also what it means to judge a work. Not starting from ourselves, but from the world the work calls upon. Not seeking our own reflection, but looking through the eyes of its creators, recognizing and contributing to its complexity, adding layers to layers, traces to trace. Because, as Nelson Goldman said, if there is no pure artistic value to extract from a work, there is also no innocent eye. And if there are finer comments, keener eyes, more curious looks, the only way to truly distinguish them is to dare to see, speak, and contribute ourselves. Contemporary artists, through their staging, seem to always slip away from the question how to judge. They say, a proper judgment is neither this nor that, but we won't say more. Perhaps, following Kant and Deleuze, we could add, the judge is first to perceive the horizon. It is to aim for the universal without ever losing sight of the works. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cécile, for your presentation. It is quite interesting. Now we have a lot of time to discussion and Q&A section for those who have something to say or wish to say something through the chat on the YouTube. We have the time for it right now. The questions could be sent in Portuguese or English. I could translate it for Cécile, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
started before anyone do any questions. I would like to just to point something that to understand the matter of the presentation, and something to came in mind during your talk. One thing I think that's a quite contemporary issue. At least people, I don't know if people realize what I'm talking about it when we talk about it. It's the matter that the point is to evaluate art at the end of the presentation, and you quoted Deleuze. It's never an isolated issue. It's about to add layers and layers and to see the horizon and so on. Mm-hmm. In the light of that, I have my opinion, but I would like to hear about you. To what extent could we even talk about autonomy of art, of autonomy of judgment, if we're talking about that's not something that's not completely isolated, but you have to do with the surrounding and the context, and that would be something I would like to hear you.
Yeah. So for me, it's an autonomous judgment because it's the one who judges who has to be free in the way that he has to take into account all the judgments that exist and then create his own judgments. So his judgment will be autonomous. I think that if you only follow the judgment of others, your judgment is not autonomous, because you will just follow some authority, some things you hear, the larger opinion, the general opinion. And so I think that autonomy really stands in the fact that you are able to hear, study the judgment of others, and then create your own autonomous judgment. Yeah. Because I think, yeah, maybe I can add something else, because when you encounter an artwork, you are not alone in front of the artwork, because you are confronted in first instance with the artist. Like you're entering a communication with someone who often is not present. He can be present in a performance, but if you see like just an object, the artist is not present. But you enter his mind, you enter his intention, and so you initiate a dialogue with him. But then there is not only the artist, there are all the other people who worked to present you that piece. And so there is the curator, there is the museum director, there are other people in the public who can have their own opinion. And so you enter sort of enormous conversation about the piece and about art in general. And it doesn't mean that you have to lose your opinion and your own judgment in all of this profusion. It means that you can enrich your experience and then create your own. I don't know if I'm clear.
Yes, it was clear, and that's something that also is another point that I'd like to highlight at your presentation. Is when you point out the role of the gallerist, the museum curator, the exhibition curator. It came to my mind in a certain sense of what Anne Coquelin said in the contemporary art and introduction. For instance, what she said about the whole of Leo Castelli. He is a curator, but he also acts actively in a museum, and he works almost as an artist. And so that she puts Castelli side by side with Duchamp and Andy Warhol. So that's, but at the same time, at least at the same book, she said that a work of art is what it say it is. It's so that's the it don't she don't give us too much space to autonomous interpretation and so on. Since it's a little bit complicated to deal with it. On the one hand, we have those figures and the curators, the gallerists who are acting in the place, the locus. On the other hand, but we have to what kind of space we have to play on our interpretation in front of what is offered to us.
Yeah, because sometimes it's true that I realize that sometimes it can be a bit difficult because you have so much information to gather and to critique and to read, and so it can also be difficult. And you can think, okay, I want to get back at a time when I could be in front of an artwork and I could just feel pleasure in front of it in a very simple way. But I don't think that this time ever existed, because even if you take like classic art, Renaissance art, it's really difficult to understand every detail, every symbol, or the intention of the artist. So I think that contemporary art has shown something that existed before. It's not something new that we have to dialogue with other people. Maybe the only newness is the fact that now people really say it. They say, I made something here. They don't they revendicate the fact that they participated to the artwork. Maybe that's the new thing. But contemporary art is not more difficult than any other genre of art, like classic or modern art, I think.
Yes, I have a comment here from a colleague. So that's I think that it's connected with what you said about the thing that contemporary art perhaps does not bring in this sense something new, only bring to the light something that already existed. For instance, when we think, that's the comment here, when we think, for instance, in classical art, let's say Beethoven, when we talk about Beethoven music, what is the 19th symphony? Is the sheet of music, is the reproduction of it. It's a reproduction for a certain sort of musicians, which musicians do it, what's the status of this work of art, right? So contemporary art just make it a little bit more clear to question it, what is at stake. I don't know. It makes some sense.
Yeah, I think that here the notion of authenticity is also at stake, because in music it's really clear. Like, for instance, if you want to play Beethoven today, how do you play it? Like, which instrument do you use? What kind of partition do you use? What kind of materials? Because how should you be authentic? Should you use the same instrument that Beethoven used, or should you change them and take something very simple as he did? Like, it's really complicated, and I think that those kind of questions are contribute to the judgment on Beethoven himself and on how we perceive it in time.
Now we have a question here. I will do the translation. It's a question from Danilo Gustavo Silva Medeiros. The question is a two-part question. Concerning the valorative principle, you use the expression interesting to refer to a work of art, and indicating already an separation and to put behind the expectation of experience of beauty and aesthetic fruition, aesthetic appreciation. The concept of beauty almost relies out of your presentation, and the question will be, what's the place of beauty in contemporary art, considering the challenge that modernism brought with itself?
Okay. So I think that, the question is, how does beauty intervene, I think, in contemporary art, right? What's the place for beauty? I think that beauty is perceived by contemporary art as a constructed, so as something that evolved through time, and as something that we can measure in basis of society and countries and history and periods of time. So as a constructed. And so artists use beauty to question it. They don't take beauty as something that was dictated, as something evident. And so I think you can find beauty in contemporary art, but in a kind of second moment. Like, first you see the work, and you think, oh, it's beautiful. But at the same time, you know the artist is showing you something beautiful, constructed. So you have to interrogate yourself and, okay, which kind of beauty is it? Why do I like that? Should I really find this beautiful or not? And maybe you can have a kind of sentiment, a kind of pleasure, which can be related to beauty, but always in a very reflective. So I think that there is beauty, but in a particular way. Yeah.
I don't know if Danilo wants to reply this, but if there's another question, I'll wait. So otherwise, I will do another comments to it. That the point that I'd like to bring that perhaps, and now it's just thinking out loud, when you present the case of the threefold, Rauschenberg, de Kooning, and Jasper Jones, and the question about who is the real artist and who made it and who is the author of it. My question will be if, and perhaps that was the Rauschenberg provocation at it. Does it really matter to judge? So, and it's quite. It may sound a little bit offensive to say that. Does it really matter? Does it really matter who is the artist who made it? But perhaps not. And I would like to I don't know, if have something to do, and perhaps that's something to do with what you said about the beauty. And I'd like to bring the example of the painting. The El Coloso is a painting that it is at Museo del Prado in Madrid, and during my academic studies in visual arts in South of Brazil, I learned that there was a painting from Francisco de Goya, and I always like Goya and his paintings, and that painting always captured me. I find it very intriguing, the atmosphere and so on. And however, during my bachelor and the middle of the bachelor course in 2008 or 9, the museum gave a note and said that now perhaps it's not a Goya's painting, it's from his student. And funny is that it does not change anything at all in how I related to this painting. So and more interesting is that several years before that, or after that, in 2021, the museum said, okay, now it is a Goya painting. So the fact that first it was a Goya, then it was not a Goya anymore, and then now it's officially a Goya painting. It doesn't matter to how does I feel, how do I relate it to this work of art now. And I don't know, in a certain sense, of course, in a different level, there is a relation to what the Rauschenberg, de Kooning, and Jasper Johns proposed, that perhaps it doesn't matter who is the author, how do you relate to this kind of work. It's just how do you feel, and perhaps that's the point of the beauty in contemporary art. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say and then who made it, and still it's a matter how to experience it. And that's a Kantian concept of aesthetics relationship, right? So
yeah, maybe what Rauschenberg is saying is really what you're saying. Like he's saying, okay, I have to show you by this little exercise, by this work, where there are three artists, which where neither of them are really artists. I have to show you that authorship is not important, that you have to look with your own eyes, that you have to feel pleasure, that you have to get into this, and not uniquely because you worship the artist, the name, the signature, etc. And so, yeah, I think that's really the point of Rauschenberg, and I think that's what happened with the painting of Goya you're telling about. It makes you ask yourself, what do you like in the painting? What am I looking for? Do I look for the forms, for the aesthetic only, or do I also look at the message? And there are no right answers in that. I think we all have to know what we like in paintings, and we also have to be able to, in painting and sculpture and installation, in art in general, and we also have to be able to change opinion. Because sometimes, I don't know, when you're young, you like a kind of art, and you think that you will like that kind of art all your life, but then you change completely opinion. So yeah, I think that we go back to autonomy. You know, as you said before, we have to discuss, to learn, and to create our own mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to stress it out because actually there are the first lines of Kant's analytic of the beauty. That is, in order to decide if something is beautiful or not, you don't have to rely on understanding. Also, it depends on how do you feel towards it, and that's the point of aesthetic judgment in this sense, right? So, and as you said, it's quite curious to think that the concept of beauty, something that evolved through time, and beside that, or at the same time, what we judge as beauty or as beautiful change also. So that's the tricky question when you say, okay, something that it is autonomous, but it's an autonomous judgment. It depends on me and my feelings and how I relate it to some work of art. But I am an historical person, and then I will, through time, I will have thoughts today that I didn't have a few years ago, and I will not have and in the future. So I will relate things differently in different times, because I am a different person in this kind. And it's really interesting to think about it.
But I think that some people think that because some people search for something very stabilized, absolute in time, and often people are in search of answers that will remain still forever. And I think that philosophy is quite the opposite. It's to know that you don't know, and that you can change opinion, that you can be convinced by a good argument. And I think that that art is the same. We can see nowadays that art history is also a construct. I'm not saying that art historians only tell lies. It's not that at all. I think that sometimes some things can be changed. We can discover that, for example, a female artist was as good as a male artist, but she wasn't taken for granted at the time. So that's why she isn't part of art history now. So yeah, I think that to understand that things are constructed helps a lot.
Just something that occurred me right now to I don't know if who are watching this realize how, or could realize how constructed we are. Our concepts of art are. For instance, let's talk about not only contemporary art but classical art. To say, if we thought about Johann Sebastian Bach at the time, he doesn't have the fame of the relevance that today we give to Johann Sebastian Bach music. The same we could say, for instance, about Michelangelo Caravaggio. Caravaggio, yes, you were. He was a really considered painter at his time, but during a long time before that, he almost became an anonymous painting, and we need the studies, for instance, from Robert Longhi to brought the Caravaggio back to the mainstream of painting. So that there was a guy centuries ago, so it was really important in painting art history, and today we know Caravaggio as Caravaggio, but I don't know, 100 years ago or 100, it was not the case, right? It's really something that it's changed through time. That's I'd like to make it a little bit to illustrate it how our concepts of art, of beauty, are constructed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If someone has more comments at the chat, let me see if I something more that. So otherwise, I have just a final question. That's something that it could be a little bit provocative to
Let's do that.
To say so. It's the point of the word aesthetics. When we thought about aesthetics, we dealing with, or that was at the root, the disinterest that we have to do, not about we don't relate something through concepts or moral values and so on. It has to do about our feeling of pleasure or displeasure. That would be aesthetics. However, and that's have to do with perhaps with the Nilo comments about the concept of beauty and the contemporary art. Contemporary art have several agendas that not exclusively about beauty. They have social agendas and so on, and different things. And that's not a problem at all. But if we go, if we were to be a little bit conservative and the meaning of aesthetics, all the agendas are not specifically about aesthetic of art, except it is extra aesthetics issues, extra aesthetics matters. They're not directly related to aesthetics itself. It's not a problem at all. So, but the problem is that if in today aesthetics, or better, if today philosophy of art, it's not quite about aesthetics. There are in the root there's distinctions in Hegel, for instance. One thing is aesthetics, other thing is philosophy of art, but in a different sense. But perhaps today it is clear. Well, something is what we talk about aesthetics and how do we feel regarding something, and other things remains to the field of philosophy of art. It involves all other agendas, and not only political agendas, but also a lot of other matters, such as the role of the curator and gallerist and so on have to do it. So what do you think about these distinctions today about aesthetic and philosophy of art?
Yeah, so I think that aesthetics is a tricky word because it can mean a lot of stuff. So it can be a synonym to philosophy of art, but I think that here we mean it in the sense of feeling beauty or feeling pleasure in a way that is not conceptual. And so I think that this adjective can apply to certain parts of contemporary art, but can also apply to others. Like, for example, in front of a landscape, you can feel the sentiment of beauty. So it's at the same time a very large word that you can use in several occasions, not only with art. And it's also something restrictive when you think about contemporary art as a genre which has a lot of different stuff in it, but that can resume in the way that they change the topos, the locus of the artwork. For example, if you take the works of Anne-Veronica Janssen that I showed in the beginning of my presentation, I'm going to show it. She's right there, left. So she creates often huge installations where you enter a colored world where the light is important. And so it may seem that the concepts are not useful here, because what counts is really the pleasure you feel, the experiments you're having, the experience you're having, and the aesthetic experience you're having. But at the same time, there are concepts maybe in a second time, because you start to think of what you're experiencing. And so I think that there are aesthetics judgment with contemporary art. Maybe there are always aesthetic judgment in contemporary art, but sometimes they appear right on in those kind of works, and sometimes they come afterwards, or sometimes they almost not come. It depends a bit. So I think that if you talk about art, you have to always begin with the pieces and see what kind of judgments create. It's not one unique judgment that can be opposed on the works. Yeah. I don't hear you anymore.
Okay.
Okay.
No. Thank you very much, Cecile, for your rich presentation and being here with us. And it was a pleasure. And thank you also to everyone who was able to attend it. It will remain on YouTube for views and so on. We will continue our conference series on the coming weeks with the conference at the 17th July, conference called Kandinsky, Neoplatonism or in Modern Art, from a colleague from Maia Fernandes from Federal University of Bahia. But for now, thank you again, Cecile, for being here, and it was really a pleasure.
For me too. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.